Hey everybody, welcome to the final scenario of Parkitect, and just in time for Halloween, we have Haunted Island with the scenario Zalgonia. Now, according to the description of this scenario, this is a mansion with a large mountainous estate that is believed to be haunted, and we need to purchase this land for a very low price. Kinda seems like a Japanese housing market trick here. I don't know if anybody knows, but in Japan you can buy houses very cheaply if they are believed to be cursed in some way, either because somebody died there or because something terrible happened, and usually it ends up that foreigners buy these houses for a cheap price because most Japanese believe them to be not really worth the risk of dealing with whatever supernatural might be occurring there. And I guess we sort of have a theme park equivalent of that going on here. The scenario goals are to have 500 guests in the park, which is not that many actually, it's pretty easy. A happiness rating of at least 75%, which is also pretty easy. There should be somewhat of a caveat here, and I think it's actually that people aren't too happy as they start off in this park. And then we also need to have no loan debts, so seems like it's not too difficult of a scenario as far as the basic goals are concerned, but then again, we also do have a very strange map, and especially a very difficult to work with terrain. As you can see, the entrance is all the way over here and it leads into this big valley with all kinds of random spooky stuff. Fun fact, and I know this is something that some people have discovered about the scenario as well, Zalgonia is actually named after Zalgo, which is an old internet creepy pasta dude. It's a face with black eyes and a black mouth, and usually very distorted. And if you look at the terrain textures here, it actually becomes a bit more obvious if you look at it straight from above. But if you look at these terrain textures, you can see a sort of a left and right eye socket here, and a mouth, and it all just kinda spins from this center, and you have all these crazy lines of terrain painting here. I have to say, it's also a little bit inspired by Earthbound. I've been playing that on the SNES and it's great fun, but also kind of a spooky game. But yeah, sounds like a good option for a Halloween special, and I swear I didn't plan this timing, but I'm pretty glad that things ended up this way. So let's get started and see what we can make of it. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to do here is, by the way, I'm not going to talk like this for the rest of the video actually. I thought it would be cool for a Halloween special to keep it a bit more spooky, but yeah, whatever. It's Zalgonia, and that's all that really matters. The map is spooky, the rest of this doesn't have to be, I guess. Also, I'm only doing this as a Halloween special because it just happens to be timed that way. I swear I wasn't, delaying on the whole series just to end it on a high note, but here we are, and I guess it works. Anyway, I wanted to start off by creating a lake here because as unusual and nice as the landscape is, I guess it's definitely something that's kind of hard to work with. I also thought it was something that's very hard to make look good. So instead I wanted to try and turn this thing into a lake and have some, roller coaster go over it, interact with the water as much as I can. So I'm going for an inverted coaster because these things are always amazing terrain coasters. I think the thing that makes them so good at being terrain coasters is the fact that you're below the track, so if you're close to the ground, you just feel it much more than if you're sitting on top of the track, which I guess makes sense, and I guess that's why terrain, inverted coasters seem to be much more intense than other terrain coasters. Take Nemesis or Black Mamba. I think they're really fun rides. Anyway, I can only do so much with this terrain because we do have a giant lake in the middle that I wanted to have this coaster go over. So that lift hill is surprisingly tall enough to actually go through a full-sized loop and even have some speed left for some other elements over the lakes. That's pretty good. So we get a bunch of inversions here, kind of the standard B&M deal, except a slightly different setting. And I guess it's kind of a mix in that way between a traditional B&M inverted coaster and most of these terrain coasters. For a while I thought it might be possible to also fly through the loop, but that was just way too difficult to make work, so I ended up making a corkscrew over the earlier section of the layout. And then on the other side we go down into another kind of valley, which I decided to also just turn into a lake. Something that really helps here is the fact that you can actually recolor water, because without the dark green texture of the water that I chose here, I don't think I would have turned any of this into a lake. And then at the end here, there's a large flyover that's gonna fly past what is going to be a path at some point in the future. At least I'm planning to make it into that. Not really sure yet how it's gonna work out, but in my mind it works out eventually. And then we go down into the other lake and go through a cobra roll, which I figured would work because that lake is actually a lot lower than the earlier lake is. So with the speed that's left, you can decently go through the cobra roll, but I'm honestly a little bit surprised because when I was testing the ride while building, the coaster went through the cobra roll with a decent speed, but then as soon as I started testing the ride proper and opening it, it's going through the cobra roll at a snail's pace, and I'm not really sure why that happened, but I'm gonna look into it at some point in the future because I'm not a fan of the fact that it looks like it's getting stuck in the cobra roll every time, and maybe at some point it might even get stuck there, and that's something I want to avoid at all costs. Even though, of course, this game at least works with block breaks, so you can't get the roller coaster tycoon crashes where one train bumps into the other one because they can just let go of the lift hill with the train still in front of it. But it's still annoying to run into those kinds of issues. But yeah, maybe I'll just make the cobra roll smaller at some point in the future. We'll see. Meanwhile, outside here, the rain is pouring down like crazy and the sun is shining at the same time, so I'm very confused recording this, but I mean, here in the Netherlands, autumn has actually been very spooky. It's just been raining and very dark for the past couple of weeks, which is an insane transition from the very nice late summer that we had. I don't mean to talk about the weather, but actually I do. And now all of a sudden it's really cold and dark and wet. So it's fitting for Halloween season. I guess it'll be nice if this weather continues until Halloween. Definitely feels like a proper autumn. Not that I care much because I don't have to go outside that much, because that's what life in 2020 is like. Anyway, to catch back up on what I was building, I put down a haunted mansion here because what else can you build in a map like this? I'm very glad I had the foresight to include this ride in the pre-given rides in this scenario, because if there's one ride that fits this scenario, it's definitely this one. And then of course also the ghost train, which I'm not sure if I'm gonna do anything with that. It's a fun ride, but it does involve a lot of scenery and it doesn't actually make that much money, so if I include it at all, it's definitely something for the latter half of the scenario, more for scenery purposes. But yeah, that ride's also in this scenario. For a while, I was actually thinking of just building a haunted house on top of the hill and make that sort of your pre-given ride in this scenario. But instead of going with that, I just built a haunted house myself, because it seemed kind of more fun, and it still gives players of the scenario a choice in wherever they want to put their rides and what they're gonna be. And it also helps because the haunted house on top of the hill is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and guests in this game get tired pretty quickly from walking up and down elevations, so that would be supremely annoying from a gameplay perspective. Now for the coaster station, I'm trying something which I haven't really done before, but which I really love, and that is just going all out with a Gothic theme. It's not really a theme, it's really just Gothic architecture with flying buttresses and all of that stuff. It's kind of like the building that I made for Hickory Hills, which is Gothic Baroque-ish, fair enough. But this one really has the dark flying buttresses and everything that people usually associate with Gothic architecture, especially the Gothic architecture that you see in horror films and games and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't actually have any particular inspirations for this build. Sometimes I look up, some real life buildings and try to get inspiration from them. But Gothic chapels and churches and cathedrals all have standard enough architecture that it's something to easily base your stuff on. I did take a look at some pictures of Arkham Asylum, particularly the Lego sets, which sounds stupid, but I always find them a really fun way to see how you can make certain themes happen with very small and simple pieces, because everything in Parkitect is of course very stylized, and looking at Lego sets can be a nice inspiration to see what you can do with simple blocks to represent a certain theme. But there was nothing particular I drew from that. So really this is just a random Gothic cathedral. I do have to give a shout out to Robo Flamingo on the Parkitect Discord, because I came across their Gothic stuff in Parkitect a while ago and it looks really cool. I didn't draw too much from it in terms of color schemes or anything like that, but it made me realize that Gothic architecture is so much more doable in this game than I thought. And it's all thanks to these basic shapes. You can basically shape out anything with these things if you are creative enough in how to use them. And for these flying buttresses, I think a combination between the basic shapes and the chimneys for the vertical stacks, and then using the new diagonal basic shapes for the connections between the buttresses itself, it gives a decent idea of what Gothic ridiculous architecture is like. And of course, at the front we have to put a cross there as well, because you have to incorporate all of those Christian themes into your horror story. And that aside, there's not really too much to the building. I ended up using some fences at the back of gates, castle pieces, to try and make some Gothic stained glass-ish windows. I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of how it looks, but I do think the texture works well enough for it, because it does kind of give a stained glass idea. Obviously the colors are a little bit off, but what I could figure, I think it's one of the best pieces to use for this kind of thing, especially because fences are slightly to the right or the left on a grid line, whereas walls are perfectly on a grid line. So if you're combining fences and walls together, you can always make sure that the fence is either set behind or in front of the wall a little bit. So those combinations are often really useful. I think the same goes for the stone wall fences. It's always nice to put those on the bottom of buildings just outside the grid line so that they stick out a little bit to create foundations, or if you raise them up a little bit, create some different decorations on walls. I was recently thinking that French architecture, Haussmann style, might be really cool to do in Parkitect, and I haven't seen it that much, but I'm going way off topic here. It's just something that I think with all of these pieces you could very easily do as well. Now, of course, any church also needs a big spire, so that's what we're going for here. This bell tower kind of feels a little bit off compared to the rest of the church building, not gonna lie. It feels a bit more like a train station bell tower than a church, for instance. But as soon as I started building it, I was questioning it, but I was also like, it looks good, I like it. So I just wanted to continue and go on with it. But very often churches, I find, more than train stations or city halls, don't have these extra floors on top of it with a more open bell tower or clock face structure, and instead just go straight to the spire and focus on having a lengthier, pointier spire instead. But then again, making lengthy and pointy spires in Parkitect is very difficult, and even for this particular spire I had to put all kinds of roof pieces and pillars and basic shapes and dormers together to make it look like something decent. But I'm pretty happy with it, honestly, and I still really enjoy putting spires together in this game. One thing I noticed when I was putting this foliage in here is that you can now recolor all of the planters in the game as well, which is really awesome. They used to be stuck on a single color, and I really didn't discover this because I didn't really use any of them much in RoboPark, but you can completely recolor those now as well. So you can make the bushes that used to be quite bright green, very dark green as well, or red or blue, whatever you want to do. And for this scenario that's particularly handy because, well, I didn't want to use any bright foliage. Either everything's going to be brown, or it's just going to be very dark, washed out, desaturated green, kind of like the willows that you see plot throughout the map as you open it. So I'm just going to go along with that theme. So it's good that I'll be able to actually recolor all of the bushes to go along with the foliage that's already in the map as well. Now at this point, I ran my first test to see if I could make money on this map, and I failed horribly, and so I figured, let's just take out another loan and build another roller coaster, and hopefully by the time that this is done, I can actually make some profit. Now, I can already predict, because I am recording this commentary just after I finish this time-lapse, that it's not going to go too well. But at the start of this video and at the start of building all of this, I was still feeling very confident that this scenario would be a walk in the park, so there's going to be a bit of a plot twist later on. But for the time being, I thought it would be a great idea to build this powered coaster here, get a coaster in with slightly different stats as the inverted coaster, something for the people who want medium intense rides. And also I don't use the powered coaster too much, so I figured it would always be good to have this coaster in here and make sure that I don't just keep using the same coaster types on every scenario. It's also a decently easy coaster to build. I did want to see if I could make it follow the terrain as much as possible and have a very curvy, smooth flowing layout. But aside from that, you don't have to think about a lift hill, which makes everything a lot easier, because with most coasters, of course, you have to worry about what height you're on and whether you still have enough energy to continue into the curve or hill that you're building. But with this one, you can just build wherever you want. You just have to keep in mind that the speed has to be decent, and usually it stays at the same speed. At least that's how the powered coaster works in game, but I think realistically you do want it to speed up as you're entering lower sections in the layout and to slow down as you're entering the higher sections. So I did have some varying speeds on this layout. I think its top speed that it reaches though is about 60 kilometers an hour, which is pretty slow. Maybe I'll look into it and see if I can bump it up, even though powered coasters do tend to be pretty slow, because I think it's kind of boring. But for now, I'm pretty happy with it. I also decided that the station would probably be best inspired by the station of the inverted coaster, just a bit more simple and a bit smaller. Actually, it's not simpler at all. In fact, it's possibly even slightly more detailed, as I added some extra stuff to all of the buttresses. So yeah, it's just a smaller version that doesn't have a spire, because you have to be very conservative with wherever you put your spires, I think. I mean, I joke, of course, and I always talk about spires and weenies, but you really shouldn't place too many of them, I think, and stick to places where they are very visible and they're clearly signposting that there's a big ride or a central building in a themed area. Something like this, and this coaster is neither of those, so I'm gonna use kind of the same design language, but none of the extravagance of the station for the invert. And also we have a small building that you walk underneath in the queue line, but that's about it. The rest of the queue line is just going up this hillside. And at this point I wasn't really realizing this, but people in this game do get really annoyed at the fact that they have to walk up and down, and they get super tired. So the fact that I built this queue line in such a way that you have to walk down all the way down the hill and then walk up again is kind of mean, even in a realistic sense, but I just figured this would be the best looking option. At least the exit path doesn't bring you back down again, so if you get out of the exit you stay at the same level as the coaster station itself is. And the station itself is nicely nested at a level where I think the coaster can just dive underground at the end of the station, but as it comes out of the station it can just fly into the valley and fly straight over the paths, so it's a nice kind of height location it's at there. And finally, I wanted to build a Gravitron just because I had some money left, and I figured, you know, maybe this thing can draw in some people and make some money. But a fat chance, I totally overestimated this thing. It's kind of useless, but let's just take a look at the map and see where we stand. Alright, I suppose I have to eat my words, because I just spent almost 2 hours trying to get this scenario to actually work, and time again I just went bankrupt, and I had no idea what to do. If you look back into my financial history, you can see that on this attempt, which is... I don't know which attempt this is, but there have been quite a few. I had a few months of ups and downs where every month you had that ominous warning that I would go bankrupt and that the park would be closed after just 1 month of not making profit. But then again, I ended up making profit again most of the time. If this month right here, this 70, was actually negative, I would have lost this try again, and I had to start from the beginning. But in the last couple months, for some reason, I've been starting to make a profit again, and I can't put it down to any particular strategy, but on every attempt, I've tried to do a number of things. First of all, keeping check of vandalism, make sure that nothing ever gets vandalized, and as soon as it does, put a mechanic on it. Also, of course, keeping in mind that trash cannot be anywhere, and as soon as I see that, put a janitor on it. Trying to see if the weather is not too bad, because one of the biggest problems in this map is that the weather is absolutely horrible, and every time it rains, people basically can't ride the roller coasters, which are the main money makers in the scenario. I do have an indoor haunted house, but that thing barely makes any money, and the same goes for the Gravitron here. And then it's also just really hard to attract people in this scenario, and it's difficult to make them happy. Right now, I actually have good stats, finally, which I think is the main reason that I'm finally starting to make a very small profit. But for the longest time, I had terrible ratings, and it was very hard to pin it down on any particular thing that's wrong with this scenario. I have decent, intense rides, especially with this invert coaster here, which honestly has really good stats. And the rest of the rides, I think, fill in a roster of gentle to medium intensity rides that should cover everything. And then I also have food, toilets, and drinks. The only thing I did on this attempt that I haven't done before is, for a while, I made drinks and food free. Right now, I jacked up the prices a little bit to what they are in-game without changing anything, which seems to keep people happy. But before I did that on all of my attempts, the guest happiness was somewhere around 10 to 30%. Absolutely horrible, and people would leave the park very soon after entering, if they entered at all. And I could never really get above 150 guests, and we're now somewhere around 160, so things are slowly looking up, but at the same time, I still continuously have to work on everything and make sure things don't go wrong. So at this point, for instance, I have another vandalism attack, so it's time to look for the vandals and kick them out of the park before they destroy anything, because my profit margin right now is so slim that I absolutely have to look out for everything. So the way that I'm doing this is just turn on B, and by turn on B, I mean just press the B key so that all of the scenery disappears, and just look through the crowds if you see any backwards hats. Funnily enough, I realized that in today's Corona world, vandals are the only people who actually oblige by wearing the mouth masks, which is kind of funny. I guess they are actually behaving better than most people are, but at the same time, they're also destroying everything. This scenario also made me realize that people vandalize things even if they aren't strictly vandals. So it's not just these people with the bandanas that vandalize stuff. They just do it way more than other people. But people in general will destroy their environment if they get mad and angry, like it's Limp Bizkit or something. So I don't know. It's something that you have to be very wary of. I think that's everyone I could see for the time being, but I'll just skip forward for a bit and see if I can find anything else. For now, I'm just gonna keep slowly working up a very small profit this way. Hopefully I can still stick to it the next couple months. And then once I have a little bit of income and some expendable income, most importantly, I'll see if I can spend it on anything useful. Because I'm also stuck with the money that I have because I already have 2 loans. So I need to repay one of these before I take another loan, which is also kind of an oversight on my behalf. I think it's better to take a bigger loan that you're not sure if you can pay for it, because you might as well at that point build some really big rides that can rake in the cash instead of playing it conservatively as I did and getting stuck on your map for over an hour. Either way, I'm gonna go back to tinkering with everything. Looks like this month is gonna be a hard one again, and I think the weather has a role to play there, because as soon as this coaster isn't ridden by anyone, I don't make a profit. But yeah, we'll see. I'll see you guys back in another time lapse hopefully, and otherwise we'll see how I can get myself out of this situation. Alright, so that still took me a bunch of tries, and also, as you can see in the bottom left corner, 2 in-game years to finally make a decent enough profit where I feel like I can start building stuff again and make something out of this. So as you can see, I got a huge loan, and that's really the only strategy I have left at this point. I paid off my old one just so that I can get an enormous new one to try and build good enough rides to actually draw in more people into the park and hopefully get an economy of increasing returns going where more people will ride the existing rides and I'll finally start making some good money. But I have to say, this scenario is beating me up much more than any scenario so far. I wasn't expecting this to be the most difficult scenario for me. Obviously, I've made it, so I'm not entirely sure why I'm so surprised. It's just that many people who've played the game, and I've tried to see, what people think of the scenarios and what are things they like and dislike about it, especially as I was working on the scenarios for the new DLC. I say new DLC, but the DLC that came after the full release of the game. But yeah, most people didn't seem to struggle with Zalgonia as much as some other park, for instance. Adventure Island, I think, was really difficult for a lot of people. I know for me also, Orchard Acres was kind of annoying. But yeah, I really wasn't expecting this scenario to be that hard, but I really think it's kind of in the invisible difficulty of it. The fact that it's really hard to attract guests to this park, it's hard to make them happy, and then the weather is just absolute shite. And I think one of the things that made a difference for me is that after a bunch of retries, I finally got some decent weather, which meant that I could make just enough money for a couple of months that I could get myself out of the sticky situation. Anyway, let's catch back up to what I'm actually doing here. I'm building a steel looping coaster because it's just always a good coaster to build. Not too expensive, always fun to build something with, and especially in a setting like this, I was kind of inspired by the new Revolution in Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is a real-life Schwarzkopf steel looping coaster, which I absolutely adore. And I think the fun part about that layout is that the vertical loop is somewhere in the middle of the layout, rather than at the beginning, as it is with many coasters, but because it makes use of the terrain, it manages to put it somewhere in the middle of the layout. It's also the first roller coaster with a vertical loop in the world ever built, at least the modern type. There have been looping coasters before, but they usually featured some kind of circular loop. And the new Revolution is the first one that did it with the teardrop shape that we all know and love today. But yeah, it's a really fun coaster, one of my faves in the park actually, and I think it's kind of underrated just because there are so many huge and great coasters in that park. But yeah, I just love the layout and I figured I could try something similar where I'm hugging the terrain as much as possible, and you start off the layout with a few curves and swooping hills going over the terrain, and then somewhere in the middle you get that loop, which here is placed over the lake, which I think makes it pretty scenic, and then just a few more curves and helixes, and then you're back into the station. I also didn't really know what to do with the brake run station simulation section for this coaster, so I'm just putting it right next to the inverts, and I'm gonna try to make some kind of building out of that. Not really sure how that's going to work yet. Actually, I am, because I recorded this time lapse before, of course, and I'm talking after the fact, but you're gonna see, it's gonna be pretty interesting. And the station itself is kind of placed in an awkward position because it's right next to the brake run there, so there are going to be two buildings very close to each other, which I'm not a huge fan of from a ground perspective. It does look a bit strange, but then again, I do think it kind of works with the fact that most of the buildings in this area will all be oriented in the same direction, all pointing towards the entrance. So I think it's going to create an interesting sort of Gothic dark town look to this whole area. Kind of medieval. I'm honestly not really sure what style exactly I'm going for here, but just imagine an old 19th century mansion that's kind of rotting away, and then just extrapolate all of the materials and looks from that and throw in some Gothic churchy architecture, and I figured I could call it a day. So for this building, for instance, I'm trying something similar with the very narrow, lengthy profile of the whole building, and then adding lots of detail and brackets and borders alongside the roof. And underneath that, we have space that could be maybe a maintenance space for the looping coaster. I think it's also interesting because it creates this really cool fly-through for the invert. One of the problems with the invert, for me at least, has always been the fact that it goes over that hill so slowly, and it just looks a bit weird. It's too stretched out and strangely placed over the paths, so having it go through this building rather than next to it, I think manages to mask that a little bit as well, and actually makes it a fun element of the ride rather than something that just looks kind of strange. I maybe could have turned it into a mid-course brake run, I guess is what you're thinking perhaps, but I don't think that's something that would work here because we still have the Cobra loop after this, and I think it's just too low. that the train won't be able to make the Cobra loop if it goes through this mid-course brake run, and coasters should always be able to make all of the elements past their mid-course brake run if they have to be stopped for some reason. So I'm kind of screwed there, and I didn't want to remove the Cobra loop, especially after I changed it into the slightly smaller Cobra roll, so yeah, I'm just leaving this be as a strange, very slow, stretched out hill. And that's basically all I wanted to do for that building. Now it's time to start building on the station as well, which I didn't really know what to do with it exactly. I ended up going for kind of a Second Empire Main Street-ish building with a mansard roof, which was not really the first thing that I was thinking of, but, and this is gonna sound really strange, I still had my Google Images tab open with a few ideas that I didn't look back on at all during the whole build, but I realized that I still had it open with the Arkham Asylum Lego set, and I thought it looks really cool, and I really wanted to build a building much more directly inspired by that, so that's what this is. It's not really using the shape or exact details of that set, because I'm still trying to work with the Parkitect pieces and seeing what would work best with Parkitect pieces, but it is kind of that mansion-ish 19th century architecture. So it's pretty neat. I also decided to have all of these big pillars made out of basic pieces. I really need to do that thing a little bit more with different sizes and shapes of basic pieces, because the possibilities with especially these cubes and the fact that you can place them anywhere on the grid that you want, the possibilities are basically endless. And I think the only issue if you use them too much is that it becomes a bit too time consuming, but especially for pillars like this or cornices or other building elements like that, I think they're really great for details. And that's one of the things that personally I think I've improved a lot on. If you compare my first builds for this whole scenario playthrough, I usually just stuck to the basic walls and roofs and maybe some borders here and there, some details, but no basic shapes to get out of my comfort zone. And I think the use of these basic shapes is just one of they just have so much potential. Same goes for that balustrade. I still love that balustrade. It's so simple. It's just some borders and pillar pieces between it, and then some round and cone basic shapes to shape out a balustrade. And I think it works, especially given that everything in Parkitect is kind of simple with very low poly models and simple textures. I think it works to create balustrades or other kind of classical details that you want just out of basic shapes. And another thing that they work for really well is what you can notice on this building is making pillars taper down in width as they go up, which Gothic buildings like to do a lot, for example with their flying buttresses, and it just helps to add a sense of verticality to a building and make it seem larger than it really is. So this building has a lot of pillars or pilasters, columns, and most of them kind of taper down as you get to the top, and especially the spire. You can see it has some decorations on it and stuff, and it gets narrower as you get to the top, and then it finally fans out again and you get the big spire on top. And I think that just makes it look more interesting than if the whole thing was just a single pillar of a single width, and no variation on it either. So that's just a little tip I would give, I guess, is if you're building pillars, especially in a Gothic style or something like that, even Roman columns typically taper off as you get to the top, and it's something that you don't really notice all the times, but it's a little, well, it is forced perspective in a way as well. Greek and Roman columns, for instance, they taper down a little bit to the top as well, and if you're standing in front of it and you're looking up, you don't really notice that they get narrower toward the top, but it does make the whole thing look much taller because your eyes are of course used to things getting narrower as they get further away from you, or well, higher up from you, I guess. And then we have a queue line where I decided to be a bit cheeky and use different textures for the queue path. I don't know why I don't do that more often, because it can work really well with scenery to have some variations in your queues. It's something that you see in real life theme parks, and I guess it's just kind of a leftover from my Roller Coaster Tycoon habits that I'm just kind of used to using the same queue path for an entire queue. But yeah, by all means, just vary it up and add different textures and stuffs for different sections of a queue line, because it's something that can make it look a bit more interesting as well. And then over here, we have this section with food and drinks, which I really needed the happiness of the people to be at the highest level I could get it, because I think that was the biggest problem with my struggle of trying to get this scenario to work. It's difficult to attract guests, it's difficult to make them happy. The weather in this scenario absolutely sucks, which unfortunately also affects people's happiness, I think, I'm not sure. But no, they just get upset because they can't ride any rides. So I need to keep them happy no matter what, so I'm just gonna have so many facilities and janitors and mechanics walking around just to make sure that nothing ever breaks down. They can get food and drinks wherever they want to, and we'll just treat them like kings, because otherwise it's just gonna be really annoying and leave negative reviews. So yeah, have that little food court over there, and since it's next to the big church building, which is the station of the invert, I figured it would fit to make a kind of a mini version of that building, essentially. Just take some colors and pieces from that building and build a small chapel with it right next to it. And then another essential building, of course, is a little toilet building here, which also has an information kiosk in it. I didn't even have an information kiosk before, I'm pretty sure, so that was kind of weird, but the map is small enough where I think people won't get lost too much, but it's still good to add it, of course, so adding that in here as well. Plus, it adds another building, and I do want to try as much as possible to give this whole space a village-like feel, so I think it works for that as well. And then finally, we're getting into my last section of this scenario. The one last thing I wanted to do before I try to actually make the goals is to give this orbiter a roof. One of the things I actually changed on my last playthrough, which was my final successful playthrough where I managed to make a profit, is I just put a simple roof on top of the orbiter, because it didn't have one, of course, and it really made me notice just how much of an effect putting roofs on flat rides has. So far I've mostly done it because I like it aesthetically. Many flat rides in real life will have a roof on it, and there are especially some types of flat rides that I think you should always put them on. Like teacups, for instance, you see them without roof structures, but I much prefer them with. But even from a gameplay perspective, it makes a huge difference, and this is the first scenario to make me realize that, just because it rains so often in this scenario, and I could see all the time just how popular this ride would become if it started to rain. Because this would regularly get huge queues, and you could definitely notice that people started turning away from other rides to go and ride this thing instead. So that was really funny, and it definitely made me realize that perhaps indoor coasters are also something I should have invested more in. I know I haven't really built any of them in all of my scenarios, with a few exceptions being underground coasters, which still feels a little bit different than building a coaster and then building a roof on top of it. It's just that since you look at everything from a top-down perspective, indoor coasters just don't work that well because you don't see the coaster, and also you have to look up to a big grey box, probably some kind of backstage building that you want to hide. But if you're only looking from an aerial perspective, it's not the best thing to have in your park, so I don't know, I just don't really like it aesthetically in my scenario play, but maybe it could make a big difference. If I ever come across another scenario that's rainy, definitely need to keep in mind the climate a lot more, because the rain absolutely screwed me over so many times on this playthrough. But yeah, this building is just very simple shape-wise. I'm still trying to come up with new combinations and variations of flat ride roofs. This roof shape, I think, is something I've done many times before, but it's kind of in the detailing, I guess, that this one's different. You can see the pillars made out of basic shapes and having their capitals and bases, and also a very fancy fence on top of the whole structure as well. And then, again, because I have a queue line with a small cover, I wanted to make sure that the cover kind of has the same look and vibe as the main roof. So I'm just copying the column structure and fence style over from the main building into that little pavilion. And that is most of the buildings I think that I wanted to build for this scenario done. There's just a lot of detail work still left to do. Some lighting, as you can see, which the rain very handily made me realize. And, well, of course, there's always a job to do with putting clutter everywhere. And there were just some open spaces where I still had to fit in some fences. I just don't want to leave the basic default fences anywhere, so I always try to replace them with my own borders or fences or whatever. And of course, there's still a lot of foliage work to do as well. I kept the foliage basically the same as you already get in the map, which I like to do just to make sure that the foliage inside the park boundaries fits with the foliage outside the park boundaries. I feel like it would be weird if it was completely different, but I do want to make the foliage quite a bit denser. And I did add a few trees and bushes that I don't have outside of the park boundary. So for me at least, it's always a balancing act to see how much foliage I want and how much more variation I want than already comes with the scenario. But again, it took all of the willpower in me to not use the new trees because they look so good and I really just wanted to grab those things instead. But I'm gonna have to save that for, at the very least, the Taste of Adventure DLC scenarios. But yeah, I forgot. I still had 2 more little buildings that I wanted to add, and these are these glass-covered buildings on the side of the queue line for the inverts. These are kind of inspired by Harry Potter in Universal, where you also have the greenhouse building. I know these things don't look like greenhouses, but that vibe combined with the Gothic architecture of Hogwarts was something that I always liked. So kind of took a little bit of inspiration from that. But it's not anything direct, I guess. And yeah, that's basically all that I did for this scenario. I'm finally just putting a bunch of foliage everywhere, making sure that I have enough ground shrubbery. But that aside, it's time to run this park and see if I can reach 500 guests somehow. So let's see. Alright, so I think I'm about to reach the goals of this scenario, but I'm kind of afraid that I'm gonna have to hold them for a while. Yeah, there we go. Alright, let's just fast forward and hope that I can actually make the goal in time. Although, I guess I have a better idea. While we're at it, I'm just gonna write the coasters and assume that it's all gonna be fine. So first of all, I actually gave the coasters a name. Not entirely sure why, but they're named after phobias, as always, because Roller Coaster Tycoon made me do it. And here we have the steel looping coaster doing that kind of new Revolution thing where it flies around these hills first, builds up some speed, and after just one more helix, we fly into the loop. I think I kind of misplaced that tree here. Don't look at that. But yeah, it's a pretty fun layout, and I really like how it fits into the park. I guess the only problem with it is that it does take up a lot of space on this side of the hill, which means that it's basically entirely useless. And, well, as it turned out, the space was a struggle for this park in general. But altogether, I think it fits pretty neatly into this map. And then, of course, we have the first coaster, which I'm just gonna wait until this train is done so that I can actually get a proper look at it. So in the meantime, let's actually get a look at the station, which I think is probably my favorite building in this map. Okay, I'm gonna actually pause it for a second. So the way that this works is really just basic shapes all the way down, and I think you can actually tell that I missed one over. Okay, no, never mind, that's just a diagonal one. Flying through it. Wait, that is a mistake. I don't have that over there. Wait a second. How does that work? All right, I'm gonna try to fix that. Just quickly doing some maintenance. All right. Right. I see what's going wrong there. I think I just have to offset that by 8 and then go into the middle here, and then that should do it. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, it's just basic shapes all the way down. I'm just using the diagonal ones to make big diagonal beams for the flying buttresses, and simple square cube pieces and pyramid pieces, for lack of a better name. Wait, that is what you call those things. To make the basic shape of a buttress. And then of course we have a kind of fancy tower to just stack all kinds of random objects on top of each other to make a unique spire, and it works every time. Alright, now let's finally ride Zalgo's Wrath, which is not really the best name for an invert, I guess. I was about to call this thing Frightmare, but then I realized that I keep calling inverted coasters Frightmare just because Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 I think it's one, had one called it, and it's just too good of a name. But for this scenario and, being the main coaster in this map, I think it works to have it like this as well. The start of the layout is obviously very heavily inspired by Nemesis, just a turnaround into a corkscrew, but after that it becomes a whole lot, less terrain-based, and we enter this area where we fly over the water into a vertical loop, and then a quick turnaround into a pretty kind of typical bunch of elements for a flying coaster, I guess. It's just that the order and the way that it's placed in the scenery is very unique. There's a support there, which is kind of messed up. Not sure why it does that. And then we fly through the very slow building that also houses the brake run for the steel coaster. And finally into the Cobra roll. I always keep calling these things Cobra loops. Sorry about that one. It is a Cobra roll. But yeah, I made it a little bit smaller so that it maintains a decent speed. There's another tree that I have to remove. Good thing that I'm doing this quality testing. Let me see. Let's get rid of that. And I think there was a tree over here too. Yeah, there we go. The spooky trees don't have a lot of clearance, which in some ways is a good thing because it means that you can plop lots of them together and you can do a lot with them in terms of scenery. On the other hand, it's very easy to place them through your coasters, which can sometimes be kind of a bad thing. But yeah, here we have the final coaster in the scenario, which is Zalgi, because I couldn't come up with a better name, so I figured might as well just make it the kids' version of the big coaster at the park. Hopefully there's gonna be a mechanic arriving at some point. Okay, 3 of them. Why is this mechanic walking? Okay, tired. Fair enough. Alright then, we got somebody on the scene. So let's give it a spin and see how it goes. Obviously, it's just a very simple layout, but at least I figured I could make it a bit more interesting than a typical powered coaster, just by, again, making it conform to the terrain in some way and have some interaction with the pathwork as well. I also tried to change the speed a little bit, which I think is a trick that you can do in this game that makes this coaster type work a little bit better, because these things have a fixed speed, but you can change that speed for every single track section. So in this case, I made the higher up track sections a little bit slower than the lower track sections, which is something that tends to happen with these things because even though they are powered, they also do have gravity affecting them. So I think it just makes it a little bit more realistic if you decrease the speed a little bit on the higher sections of a layout. But yeah, all it really does is just do some curves and go inside for a final tunnel into the station. Normally I don't like to build too much indoors, but I think a tunnel like this, which is still pretty short, is doable. And also I really couldn't figure out what else to do with the station because this is a very steep hill and it's kind of difficult to work elements like that into a park layout. So just a few more things that I think are worth showing off. Here we have the building for the steel coaster station, and you can really see those vertical elements come back here with the pillars that are kind of decreasing in size, but really the balustrades, I think that's the one thing that I'm taking with me from this scenario to all of the scenarios I'm doing in the future. Really kind of love those things. And then of course it starts to rain, because what else is it gonna do in this scenario? I did do a little bit of basic lighting. Most of it is just on the paths, but I did hang some lights here and there, and also some kind of spotlights on the tower. It's very difficult to completely light up buildings from a distance, but at least this is better than nothing, I figured. But yeah, from this point onward, I'm just gonna skip forward because I want to do nothing more than just to finish the scenario, and hopefully I can actually do that because my guest number is dwindling for some reason. I'm gonna have to check if it's maybe something to do with... Yeah, I guess so. I need to advertise the park again just to be on the safe side, I think. Just gonna do that for 3 months, but yeah, my campaign just ended and I can already tell that the amount of guests in the park is decreasing. One thing that I forgot to point out, but I had to do off camera, and I don't mean this in a ooh, I just built off-camera YouTuber kind of way, but I seriously had to do some strategizing. There's a hidden entrance in the station building here, which leads to an underground cavern that includes all of this nonsense. I always forget which button is which. Okay, there we go. We have 2 roller coasters down here. One Eurofighter, which drops out of the station into a corkscrew and then goes into a vertical lift hill where it cuts back into the station, literally. And then also a launched steel coaster. Really weird. The layouts don't really make that much sense. They're just kind of semi-realistic. I just had to add these 2 coasters to reach the minimum guest count of 500 because otherwise it was just completely undoable. So yeah, it's a shame I had to resort to these kinds of options. I really didn't want to do it, but I also didn't want to mess with the look of the scenario as it is on the ground. And it kind of had the hidden benefits of making me lots of profit, because whenever it started raining, obviously people could still ride these coasters, so it pretty evidently showed the benefits of building underground in a ridiculously rainy scenario like this one. Now, if I'm correct, I should be getting this trophy, and here we go. Awesome. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I got achievement unlocked the Parkitect, which I guess is one of the coolest achievements you can get in this game, probably. I even, well, managed to get one of the challenge goals, of course, but the other one, it's year 13, which is probably one of the latest I've ever finished the scenario, even though it's just 500 guests. This map is just difficult. I seriously underestimated this thing, especially with the weather and how difficult it is to attract guests and make them happy in this scenario. There's a lot more to this map than there seems to be on the surface. And it's not just a strange, spooky look to it. Anyway, let's go to the main menu. Actually, no, I'm still going to save it, and then we'll go to the main menu and see if we get a trophy or any kind of animation. I actually have no idea what happens at this point. Alright, so we finished Zalgonia, and we get the big mansion at the top of the hill, and I guess that's it. Yeah, right? Yeah, that's just it. Yeah, obviously we have the Halloween map right now because we're close to Halloween, so everything's just a little bit spooky, but we've completely done Parkitect. It feels kind of weird. I always end these videos by saying, alright, well, the next scenario is this and this, and we'll go there next time, but I really don't know where to go next time. So in that case, I should probably reveal that, of course, I'm going to continue with these scenarios because we still have the Taste of Adventure DLC, which is going to be interesting because I've made all of the scenarios for that one. And I know for a fact there are some really difficult but really interesting maps with really cool settings in that. So we'll see how that goes. On the top left, there's the button Change Map, which has been here for the past couple of scenarios, I guess. And once you do that, you go to the Taste of Adventure maps, which starts off with this one. I came up with a name for this, but I don't actually know how to pronounce this, but Yucatan Ridge. I'm sorry if I butchered this for any of you Latin Americans out there, but yeah, as you can see, it looks quite a bit different. We do still have something flying around though, so that's quite nice. But yeah, I'm gonna probably take a small break of Parkitect. I mean, I say that, but I guess every release of an episode between different videos has been a break for this. But soon enough, we'll be back with the Taste of Adventure DLC for 10 more maps and lots of scenario play. Now, finally, while I'm at it, I just want to plug this real quick. I've never actually plugged this on any of my videos, but it has been hidden in the video descriptions for a while. I also have a Discord server. I can't promise that it's very alive or very organized like many other Discord servers because, to be honest, I haven't put that much time into it. But it's been online for a while, and it has many people that I've known for years in it as well. And I can't say there's that much of a community, but if there's a place where you want to reach out to me or chat to some really cool people from the various communities that all kind of overlap on my channel, be it Parkitect or Planet Coaster or City Skylines, follow the link in the description to join the Discord, and I'll see you there. Also, of course, follow me on Twitter, though, if you're interested in all of my random live updates. That's all I had to say for today. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.